Welcome to the Disability Collective's sit-down comedy show podcast primer. I'm your describer and host, JJ Hunt. On Thursday, February 20th at 8 p.m., the hottest disabled comedians in Toronto will be at the Theatre Centre for a night of non-stop laughs. We want to make sure that you, our listeners, have everything you need to enjoy and appreciate the show. So today, we're going to share some information about the theatre, the collective's access measures, and the comedians on the bill. We're also going to provide full descriptions of the building, the art of stand-up, and the performers, now in advance of the show, so that on the 20th, blind and low vision audience members can arrive at the theatre in the know and ready to go. Later on in the podcast, I'll be joined by my good friend and colleague, Christine Malec. Christine works closely with the Disability Collective, and as a member of Toronto's blind community, she's been consulting on the description for the sit-down comedy show. This kind of comedy is new to Chris, so she's got some questions about how things are going to unfold on the 20th. All right, that about covers it for the intro. Let's get down to the serious business of comedy, shall we? As I said, the Disability Collective's sit-down comedy show will be held at the Theatre Centre in downtown Toronto. The Theatre Centre is a performing arts organization on Queen West. It's a community hub, a live arts incubator. The building it now occupies is also known by the same name, the Theatre Centre. Now, I want to talk about the building itself for a second because it is an absolute beauty. The building is at 1115 Queen West. It's a stately Beaux Arts building, squat, formal, originally 2 stories with very high ceilings. It's fully detached, which is a distinguishing quality for a building of relatively modest size in downtown Toronto. The building was constructed as a library in 1908. One of thousands of libraries built around the globe using grant money from philanthropist Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie libraries were to be designed locally, but with certain standards dictated by Carnegie himself. The job of designing this Carnegie library was given to the city architect of Toronto, Robert McCallum, and his very skilled team. They designed the building in the Beaux Arts style, which was a popular choice for formal public buildings because the stone and brickwork, the symmetrical facades, the classical details made for grand, commanding structures. This particular building is boxy. It has a central outdoor staircase of about 12 steps that lead up to the main floor. Though an accessibility nightmare, the stairs were meant to symbolize a library visitor's elevation through learning. On the sidewalk, the base of the staircase is flanked by streetlights, which were originally gas lanterns. These were meant to identify the library as a place of enlightenment. At the top of the outdoor staircase is a small, boxy portico with double front doors, framed in by square columns and decorative stonework. On either side of the small portico are sets of large hung windows, also framed in ornamental stone. It's a red brick building, but it's got lots of pale gray stone on the corners and trim and columns. It's a handsome building, and it also has a familiar feel to many Torontonians because it's one of 30 buildings built by McCallum's office during an important time in colonial Toronto's civic history. All around the city, there are police stations, fire halls, municipal buildings, and libraries that all have a similar look because they were all designed and built around the same time by the same team, all exuding this solid, grand civic institution vibe that hopes to say, this is a serious, important building in a serious, important city. The Queen West and Lisgar branch of the Toronto Public Library opened in 1909 and remained active until 1964. Toronto Public Health occupied the space from 1964 to 2013, and then in 2014, after a $6.2 million redevelopment of the heritage property, the Theatre Centre took over the space, and it's been doing great work there ever since. The Theatre Centre is home to 2 performance spaces, plus a gallery, a green roof, a cafe, and a little free library. They host performances and shows, rehearsals, readings, workshops, book launches, and even birthday parties. These days, most folks don't use the building's formal front doors. The primary entrance is on the west side of the building, on Lisgar Street. At the corner of Queen and Lisgar, you'll find a long, straight walkway that slopes down toward a pair of glass doors near the rear of the building. These doors open onto a small vestibule, and straight ahead of those doors is another pair of glass doors that open onto the cafe bar. There are tables and chairs in the cafe area, and you're welcome to grab a drink and hang out there before the show. Or you can grab a drink and a bite to go and bring it up into the theater for the show. The box office is also in this space. It's an open window with a shallow ledge just along the wall to the left of the interior glass doors. If you need to purchase or pick up tickets, or if you need any other assistance when you first arrive, that's where you'll find theater staff and Disability Collective volunteers who will be happy to help. Now, as a repurposed space, the theater center has a bit of a quirky layout. The main space where the sit-down comedy show is being performed is on what is now the third floor. Once you've entered the building, turn left, passing the box office window. After a few feet, you'll come to a hallway crossroads. To head to the washrooms, turn left. If you want to take the lift up to the performance space, go straight ahead. To take the stairs, turn right and go through the big wooden door. The Disability Collective has put together a detailed venue guide that can help you navigate the space. So for full details on all of those paths, click on the link in this episode's show notes. Now upstairs, you'll find the gallery. This will be the lobby space for the sit-down comedy show. Beyond the lobby is the Franco Boni Theater, which is the theater center's main space and the room where the comedians will be performing. The gallery or lobby is an open space. It's got old, refurbished, golden blonde wood floors. Most of the walls are white drywall, but some have exposed yellow brick. It's got a high ceiling, a bit of an industrial look with exposed pipes and ductwork. There's going to be a bar in the lobby, so you have another chance to pick up a drink before you head into the show. And the Disability Collective will have an access table set up in the lobby as well. So that's where you can get your AD headsets, your earplugs, maybe some fidget toys, and additional assistance and other access tools. And of course, they'll also have merch for sale. Accessible washrooms can be found through a doorway on the west wall, and at the far end of the gallery, on the north wall, are two sets of tall double doors. These lead into the theater. Now just be aware, there is a slight lip on the floor as you approach those doors. The theater center's main performance space is officially named the Franco Boni Theater. It's what's often called a black box theater, meaning it's an open, boxy space with black walls, black ceiling, and a black floor. Black box theaters provide theater makers with lots of flexibility in terms of seating and staging. They're the blank canvases of the theater world. Although it should be said that this black box has some rather charming architectural details like large hung windows, some incredible massive heritage doors with original wood trim, and even a deep coffered ceiling hiding above the lighting grid overhead. For the comedy show, the theater will be set up with tiered seating going up from floor level and a floor level stage area. Entering the space from the gallery, the tiered seats will be on your left, the stage area on the right. There will be 8 rows of tiered seats accessed by 2 open staircase aisles positioned 3 or 4 seats in from the side walls. Seats and space in 2 additional rows will be available at floor level near the front of the stage. ASL interpreters will be positioned on the north side of the space, opposite the room's entrance, and during the show, I'll be in that area as well, delivering live description throughout the evening via AD headsets. Seats for blind and low vision audience members will be reserved in the front rows, but it's general admission seating, so feel free to choose any seat you'd like. When booking your tickets, please include your access needs in the notes section so that the collective can reserve seats as required. The stage itself will be directly on the floor. Essentially, about half of the room is stage. The performance area will be partially delineated by lighting, including spotlights that shine directly on the comedians. A single mic will be set up at center stage, adjusted to suit the needs of each comedian. The classic backdrop for most comedy clubs is a brick wall. I would suggest that setup is so recognizable, a promoter could put a simple image of a mic against the brick wall on a poster, and without any explanation, most sighted folks would know that they're advertising a stand-up show. In the Franco Boni Theatre, the backdrop and sides of the stage will be the walls of the Black Box Theatre itself. This includes original wood paneling painted black and a row of tall hung windows with original trim directly behind the performers. So the streetlights and nightlife of downtown Toronto might be part of the set. On February 20th at the Sit Down Comedy Show, you'll be treated to material from 5 comedians. Courtney Gilmore, a brilliant and award-winning comedian, will be hosting and performing. And Michael McCreary, Ken Hall, Rosanni Christie, and Robert Houghton will all be doing independent sets. For those who haven't been to a stand-up show before, a bit of advance info so you know what to expect. The comedians will be introduced by the host one at a time. They'll make their way onto the stage from an offstage entrance beside the main doors, at the audience's right. Most club comedians are used to having a pretty small stage on which to perform. Sometimes comedy club stages are like the size of a kitchen table. So club comedians tend to be fairly stationary, maybe shuffling on the spot, turning from one side of the crowd to the other, or maybe pacing a few steps back and forth. Comedians that work large venues and stadiums have to do more moving around to fully occupy a big stage by themselves. But in clubs or venues with modest stages, staying put is often the only option. The stage area for the sit-down comedy show is relatively large. It'll be interesting to see how the comedians make use of and fill that space. Some comics use props or musical instruments or even images and slides projected onto screens behind them, but most stand-up sets are about a single performer entertaining the crowd with nothing but jokes, stories, and their on-stage persona. In stand-up, comedians tend to speak directly to the audience in the first person. I went to this place. We always behave like that. And they tend to make, or fake, a fair bit of eye contact with the audience, even if the bright stage lights mean they can't see past the first few rows. Sighted comedians tend to scan the crowd and tell us their stories directly. A lot of stand-up comedy is really storytelling. So storytelling best practices apply. Comedians use body language and gesture for emphasis or clarity. They use exaggerated facial expressions to sell a joke or to convey irony or sarcasm. Of course, every comedian is different. Performance styles, mannerisms, and personas vary wildly. So I'll do my best to convey the performance visuals and physicality of each individual comedian on the bill in my descriptions, both in this podcast and on the night of the show. Courtney Gilmore is going to be our host for the evening. Courtney is a 5'1", 40-year-old woman who self-identifies as having white skin tone with a slim, curvy build, black hair, and green eyes. In her provided bio, she goes on to say that she's a multiple limb amputee, missing both hands. Her right arm ends at the wrist, and her left arm ends at the elbow. And she also wears a prosthetic leg. Now, I've seen clips of Courtney performing in big theaters and on small stages. She tends to smile broadly as she delivers her material. You might even hear her giggle at some of her own jokes. She tends to be fairly stationary on stage, shuffling more or less on the spot, turning from side to side to address the entire audience, gesturing expressively with both arms, leaning forward ever so slightly for emphasis. When not wearing a lapel mic, Courtney generally holds the mic on her right forearm with a thick black band securing the body of the mic to her tapered wrist. Michael McCreary self-identifies as a 5'8" 8-inch tall white man in his late 20s with a slim build and short brown hair. Michael is a performer with a fair bit of contained energy. On stage, he often moves in spurts, remaining still for a joke's setup, then quickly posing or gesturing or miming an action for the punchline. Ken Hall is a 4-foot 9-inch tall man with light skin tone. He has short auburn hair with a high hairline, green eyes, and sometimes wears a trimmed reddish beard. Ken is a big smiler, and he has a lot of energy on stage. He's also an improv actor and a clown, and I'd suggest that energy comes across in his stand-up. Ken is in constant motion and gestures with his hands on almost every phrase. When one of his stories or bits gets rolling, he often paces back and forth, sometimes almost frantically, pitching forward at the waist as he addresses the crowd. Rosani Christie self-identifies as a middle-aged brown woman of Sri Lankan Tamil heritage. She has medium brown skin tone and long black wavy hair. She has MS and is a power chair user. Rosani has a very expressive face as she delivers her material, raising, lowering, and knitting her eyebrows, widening and rolling her eyes, often leaning forward, shaking her head, and jutting her chin for emphasis. Robert Houghton self-identifies as a black deaf man with deep brown skin tone and a bald head. He has a well-groomed mustache, dark, expressive eyes, and a bright smile. His bio goes on to say that he is lean and fit with a strong and active posture that reflects his background in movement arts and performance. In terms of performance style, Robert says that depending on the setting, he may sign an ASL using facial expressions and body language to communicate visually. Now, I had the pleasure of describing Robert in the Disability Collective's presentation of the Rocky Horror Picture Show last fall. Based on that, I can confirm that Robert often wears a big, broad smile. As a performer, he indeed matches the pace and nuances of his signing with the pace and nuances of his material. Why don't we bring on my friend and colleague, Christine Malec. Again, Christine works closely with the Disability Collective, and she's been consulting on the description for the sit-down comedy show. Chris, nice to talk to you again.
Hello, hello. So happy to be here. And I'm going to start right off with the negative, the little negative note, because I've never been to a comedy show, and there's a reason for that. And one of the biggest things about comedy that I find gently off-putting is that sometimes comedians will focus on someone in the crowd and speak to them and address them. And there's varying levels of positivity, negativity in which this is done. But the whole vibe as a blind person weirds me out. And here's the thing is, if a comedian's doing that, they don't know my name, so they can't say, "Hey, Christine, I'm talking to you." They might not even say "you in the blue shirt," or if I'm in a blue shirt, maybe I got it wrong and I thought I put on my red shirt. And so there's that huge awkwardness to me of the comedian might reach out. If I'm too close to the stage, they might be talking to me and I don't know. Maybe I'm having a conversation that's incredibly public in a way that I've never had before. Everyone's focused on me, and the comedian might be doing things in a body language or nonverbal way that the audience is getting that I'm not. And so this whole idea is so fraught with peril for me as a blind person that it's one of the main reasons why stand-up, sit-down comedy doesn't draw me. And so are there tropes, are there ways that this kind of interaction happens that sighted people are familiar with?
Yeah, this is, I hear you. First of all, I hear you. It is absolutely a thing that happens in stand-up comedy. Some comedians do more crowd work. It's generally called crowd work than others. But you kind of have to be somewhat prepared if you're in a comedy club in particular, as opposed to a stadium show or something. At a comedy club, there is a bit of an understanding that kind of crowd work might happen. And it often happens with folks in the front rows or the first few tables. So if you're not interested in that, often you sit further away from the stage because you're literally in the dark. The comedian can't see you if you are farther away from the stage. If the comedian's sighted, they won't be able to catch you in the back. Whereas if you're in the first few rows, a little bit of light spill from the stage will illuminate you, and you're right there, ready, ripe for the picking. So that brings up a couple of different interesting points about this particular show. First of all, the accessible seats are the first few rows. So a lot of folks who are low vision will be reserving seats in the first few rows because that's the best. That suits their access needs. But it also puts them in the position of potentially being closest to the stage and easiest to be picked out by a comedian who wants to do crowd work. So that's something to be aware of. The other thing is, first of all, in general terms, one of the wonderful things about the sit-down comedy show is this is a stand-up show by and for the disability community, right? Everyone on stage is in their own particular way aware of that kind of anxiety. It might not be exactly the same. You might have a comedian on stage who's deaf, not blind, but they still understand that kind of anxiety. So I think there's going to be, in general, just a little bit more awareness of that. So is the rest of the audience. So if there's concern about how that looks, how that feels in a public setting, it's also nice to remember that this is an audience full of friends. This is an audience full of people who have had similar experiences. And I gotta say, having talked to you about this, passed this information on to the Disability Collective team, this information is getting to the comedians. So the comedians have been made aware of this concern by the blind, low vision community. And so the comedians will know if they are going to do crowd work, there's a way to do it that is, they already know, but there is a way to do it that is particularly respectful and welcoming. And I mean, all comedians have to, read the room, as they say, and know if the person that they're talking to is game for it or not. But this particular group of comedians is going to be personally just really aware of what's needed to make sure that the person that they're talking to is actually wanting that communication. And they've been given a heads up that there are certain groups of folks who might be more reticent, might have more anxiety about that than others.
I've never heard of a comedy show being described before, and it made me wonder about, because having said what I've said about stand-up, I do enjoy watching it on TV or on a screen, and it's one of the reasons is that it is so linear and comprehensible. And yet, of course, sometimes there are things that a comedian will do that are clearly visual because the crowd's reacting and I don't know what they're reacting to. So what sorts of things do you, in general, not in this particular show because you can't know, but in general, if you think about describing a comedy show as a describer, what sorts of things do you imagine having to describe in the middle of a show?
Yeah, it's a good question. In the middle of the show, so a lot of it, and this is the whole reason we're doing the podcast, a lot of what needs to be described in the middle of the show is best described before the show, because the storytelling element of stand-up, the patterns, when a comedian is crafting their set, they're not necessarily just saying, okay, I've got this joke, then this joke, then this joke, then this joke. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to tell 4 jokes in a row. A comedian is working on the rhythm of those jokes, right? The comedian's trying to figure out how to lay that out, where the laughs are going to fall. Are you building to a laugh? Are you, there's so much involved. And there are things that are going to happen during that bit of storytelling, during that arc, that are going to need to be described. And sometimes I'll be able to, as a describer, slip in and hopefully find a spot where I can land my description in the rhythm of their piece. I can find one of those gaps and jump in with a bit of description. And those moments are things like facial expressions, right? She cocks an eyebrow, they lean forward and gesture to the crowd, so that the emphasis that a comedian is providing with their physicality, I want to make sure that information is provided to the audience. Obviously, a lot of that's also done with the voice. There's tone, there's intonation. So it's like most of the comedians are going to be able to convey a lot of that with their voice, but they're also doing that physicality thing too. So those are some of the moments that I'm going to want to jump in and describe mid-show. But a lot of the stuff that folks are going to be, the visuals that comedians are going to be referencing, that's stuff that I think I can describe in advance. That's going to be the physicality about themselves. What's a person's disability? How do they? What's their skin tone? What's their hair look like? Are they a punk? Are they a prep? Like, what are those things? So that when a comedian starts a joke with like, I walked into the store and they took one look at me and went, like. That doesn't make any sense if you don't know what the person looks like. So those are the kinds of things. And what I don't want to do in the middle of that is break the comedian's rhythm, break the comedian's storytelling flow by very quickly saying they're a very tall black,
right.
Like it's just not going to make any sense. That's going to really ruin the flow of everything. Those are the physical elements, the gestures, the facial expressions. Often the energy will be properly conveyed by the tone of voice. Like, it would be unusual for a comedian to be darting around on stage with a frantic physical energy, but have a tone of voice that's slow and calm. So I'm not as worried about that because that information's being accurately conveyed. But if there's a bit of mugging going on, like with facial expressions, if there's like gesturing to really get get your point across, sometimes that can come across in the voice like I just did, but sometimes it can't. Those are the things I want to make sure, are really conveyed because, that's important. That's important to an audience, right?
I wonder too about performance media where the body is not necessarily integral. So if you're an actor performing a theater piece, every centimeter of your body is dedicated to being that character and moving in the right ways. But say you're a singer or a comedian, your body is, I guess I'm wondering, what do they do with their hands if they have hands? Like, how does and it's probably as variable as each person to each person and body language, but is there an ideal that a comedian would strive for with respect to how they carry their body and their body language and their manner and affectations when they're on stage? Like, I guess there's always some caricature, but it's just that theater is a thing where your whole body's engaged, but singing and comedy is mostly your voice and your expression. So what are they doing with the rest of their bodies in general when they're performing?
What are stand-ups doing with their bodies? So again, a lot of stand-up is storytelling, right? So a lot of the physicality is the kind of physicality that you get in any kind of storytelling. So gesturing to the audience, gesturing specifically to convey elements of the story, to put emphasis on one part of the narrative or another, or to put emphasis on a punchline, to draw something out. Then there's the kind of gesturing and movement that is about connecting to the audience, keeping the audience engaged. So literally moving from one corner of the stage to another, turning to face this part of the crowd, turning to face that part of the crowd, to continue to engage with every member of the audience. There's kind of that physicality. And then there's mugging, this idea that you as the comedian on stage are you make a facial expression that indicates how you feel about something, and maybe the audience feels the same way. And so you can make a facial expression that conveys, yeah, we're in this together, or look how absurd that is. I mean, the classic is in The Office, right? When Jim turns to the camera and really makes that direct connection with the audience member to say, like, are you catching this? Are you catching what I'm catching? That kind of mugging, that kind of connection with the audience to say, yes, we are both experiencing this story together. Isn't this great? There's like miming. Sometimes comedians will mime part of their story. Like, I was making a drink, I was fixing a sandwich, I was sitting down in the dentist chair, and you physically take on the actions of your story. And sometimes that gets extreme. Like, there are very extreme versions of that. Jim Carrey famously used to do a set where he pretended to be a cockroach. Like, that was the whole set. He was a cockroach, and he would take on the physicality of a cockroach, and he would skitter around on the stage, drive some of the audience crazy, drive other comedians crazy. He would literally skitter to the corner of the stage and refuse to get off. So when the next comedian came on to do their set, Jim Carrey, pretending to be a cockroach, would be hiding on the corner of the stage. So that's extreme. I would be surprised if there was anything like that at the sit-down comedy show. But that's kind of the extreme version. Mostly what people are doing physically is gesturing, they're mugging, they're doing a little bit of miming, and the rest of the physicality just goes to support their persona on stage. What clothes have they chosen to wear to match their persona or convey their persona? What kind of energy? How fast are they moving? How slow are they moving? Are their shoulders dropped? Are they, those kinds of things? So the physicality is there to help convey their persona on stage.
As a describer, I'm curious, what do you think the most challenging part is going to be for you?
Trying to find the rhythm of the piece, figuring out, is that eyebrow raise an important enough eyebrow raise to jump in and interrupt the flow of their story to describe it? Is that important enough, or should I just sit back? Trying to decide when to jump in and get in the way of an audience member taking in what is, as you very rightly say, is a really nice kind of art for someone who is blind or low vision, because it is audio based, right? When am I going to jump in, and then how do I do that in a way that works with the flow of their storytelling? When I'm hearing the story being told for the first time, just like everyone else in the audience, that's going to be tricky.
You've got a challenge too, because if there is crowd talk, like if the comedian engages with an audience member, what do you do? Because the chances are they're going to draw on some physical attribute of that audience member to riff off of. And so you've got a challenge baked in right there, because you're not going to be able to pre-describe in show notes what the audience member looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate all of your work on this project. And, as usual, the questions you ask take me to very interesting professional places. So thank you, my friend. We'll talk to you again soon.
Keep laughing.
The Sit Down Comedy Show is a Disability Collective presentation, so of course, ASL interpretation will be available, as will audio description. ASL interpretation will be provided by Phoenix the Fire, AD provided by yours truly. ASL volunteers and sighted guides will also be located throughout the space. To reserve a seat near the ASL interpretation, or to reserve an audio description device, or for any other access questions, please email Ali, that's ALI, at thedisabilitycollective.com. And to download the access guide, click on the link in the show notes or head to the collective's website, thedisabilitycollective.com/sit-down-comedy-show 2025. The Theatre Centre is located at 1115 Queen Street West in downtown Toronto. That's near Queen and Dovercourt. If you're a transit user, your best options are the 63 bus from Ossington Station or the 501 Queen streetcar. If you're taking Wheel-Trans, we recommend asking to be dropped off at 99 Lisgar Street. The theater center is right there at the corner of Queen and Lisgar, and the curb will lead you to the ramp that goes straight down to the theater doors. If you're planning on taking in the audio description on the 20th, pre-show notes covering descriptions of the performance space, the comedians, and the visuals of the ongoing event will begin approximately 15 minutes before showtime. I'll also be around the collective's access table before and after the show to answer questions and to meet with friends, so please stop by and say hello. Thanks for joining me for this Sit Down Comedy Show podcast primer. I'll catch you at the Theater Center on February 20th at 8 p.m.